good evening and morning to everybody. I'm just going to do a quick introduction to Ingleborough itself and the kind of habitats and things that gets us very excited when we're wandering around doing things there, and then I'll hand over to Liz to give a bit more detail about what we're doing about them. So I'll try and move this on. There we go. So I just, first of all, I suppose I ought to say what Wild Ingleborough actually is, and it's kind of modern conservation in action, really. So we're starting to take a much larger, more landscape scale view of how we conserve a landscape for wildlife and try and encourage wildlife to be perhaps a bit more natural in the way it uses a space. And Ingleborough is probably, as you all know, a really iconic spot and a great place to start doing that. So we're trying to encourage nature's recovery through this stage land management and conservation grazing, but inevitably and hopefully in the longer term, as the project grows, we want to allow natural processes to lead the way. And effectively what we're trying to do is implement Professor John Lawton's kind of principles of the bigger, better, more joined up, and we're hoping that Ingleborough will provide an on-the-ground example of just how to do that in the world. So we've set ourselves a vision for nature's recovery. So as I say, we want to allow natural processes to return, enabling a much kind of more diverse and flourishing wildlife, but also typically and importantly that people will be inspired to come and see that wildlife and get involved in helping to look after it. The Wild Ingleborough project was originally set up by this partnership. So we were very fortunate to get a good group of people together who've been incredibly supportive. We're still together as a partnership, and it feels like a family. It feels, rather than being lots of different organizations, we're effectively working together as a good group. So we've got Natural England ourselves, WWF, who have been great at bringing in some funding, the United Bank of Carbon, which many people may not have heard of, but it's a group that's working with ourselves and others and Leeds University to fund land acquisition, but also research and monitoring work through Leeds University. And then the university of itself, and then the Woodland Trust, who are great because they supply most of our trees, and also some grants to help us do our work. So I possibly don't need to tell you where Ingleborough is, but I will anyway. It's here. It's on that kind of far distance, almost in Lancashire. Who'd have thought it is that far western edge of Yorkshire. So zooming in a little bit, our project is aimed at a combination of Yorkshire Wildlife Trust's land in the area and the National Nature Reserve, which is owned by Natural England and I guess ultimately ourselves. So this map shows the National Nature Reserve in green. As you can see, the outline in red on that green is a small part of YWT land. So we've already got part of the NNR that we're responsible for. And then the other bits of red and purple hatching. So the remainder of the red is our Wildlife Trust reserves in the area, which we've had for some time. And then the purple hatching is where we've purchased land to expand YWT reserves, but also Natural England have very recently just completed a purchase on that kind of big block of purple hatching right in the middle. So we've just literally connected up yet another chunk of Ingleborough over the last few weeks, actually. So really good news for us. And I'll leave Liz to talk a bit more about what that means in terms of the project. So within Ingleborough, we have a range of habitats. A lot of people think of it as a limestone landscape, but actually it's got quite a diverse range of habitats, and quite a lot of that middle one, the blanket bog. We've also got Ashes pasture, which is traditional hay meadows, and then we've got what we're currently calling wood pasture. It's small and it's fragmented, but it's what we'd like to see a lot more of. So that's grazed species-rich grassland, but within a wooded landscape. So you get more scrub and trees, and the cattle browse as well as graze. One of my favorites, I've written a book on it, so I'm quite keen on this stuff, is limestone pavement. This is one of the rarest habitats around the globe. A wonderful combination of geological forces and biodiversity working together. And we have some of the best examples in the Dales. It doesn't all look like this, though. A lot of it is very bare and sheep grazed, and a big target for us is to restore it back to what this is here at Scar Close, which is one of the botanically richest places that you'll come across in the UK. And then we also have a range of open habitats, so loosely called it grassland here, but it ranges from open sort of wet flushes where you'll get things like the bird's eye primrose growing, to some of the more neutral grasslands with mountain pansy, are endemic. So that's a species that grows nowhere else in the world and only grows on one small part of Ingleborough, which is the Yorkshire sandwort, as we call it. It's called the English sandwort, I suppose, but we like to adopt it. And then right up on the tops, on the alpine zone, we have the wonderful purple saxifrage, which we're all kind of keeping an eye out for at the moment because it'll be coming into flower fairly soon. So we're all making pilgrimages to the top of the hill to go and see when it's in flower. So that's in a nutshell what we have. I'm going to hand over to Liz now to talk about what we're actually doing to spread and look after that wonderful set of habitats. Liz.
Thanks, Tim. So in order to put those Lawton principles of more, bigger, better and joined into practice, we really were keen to sort of create meaningful corridors between the reserves that we already had. And as Tim has pointed out, sort of lucky enough to be able to purchase those areas hatched in purple there on the map, which has really gone a long way to joining up some of those fragments. So these have actually mean that we've now secured a vital connection that runs from the River Ribble at 280 metres elevation all the way up to the summit ridge of Ingleborough at 650 metres. So that altitudinal range is really important, which will allow the movement of plants and animals, which will become sort of ever more increasingly important in the face of climate change. Also joining up these fragments allows a more partnership approach to management across the whole of Wild Ingleborough. So one of these new areas, Ash's Shore in one of those photos there, is adjacent to a surviving fragment of Atlantic rainforest. And for example, our change of grazing management on Ash's Shore will allow that woodland to spill out and expand through natural regeneration and create, as Tim mentioned, that sort of wood pasture habitat. So we're already starting to see that, which is really exciting. Within the limestone pavements, you might just be able to see a couple of thorny species just poking up through the pavement already. Next slide, please. So grazing with cattle is a really key component to restoring biodiversity and mosaic of habitats across Wild Ingleborough. So those new land acquisitions that were hatched in purple, they'd previously been very heavily sheep grazed. Now sheep are very selective grazers, so they can nibble the sweetest plants, the wildflowers, and that tends to leave the tougher grasses behind, which then become dominant, and in turn they make it less and less habitable to wildflowers. Also, because sheep were sort of stocked on there for quite a sort of all year round, really, those wildflowers are not getting a chance to flower and set seed. So we've switched to grazing with low numbers of hardy cattle breeds. As you can see here, we've got some lovely belted Galloways and Natural England's red poll cattle. So just some of the hardy cattle we've got on site. So unlike sheep, they're less selective, so they just sort of tear at the grass. So that means that they actually eat a lot of those tougher grasses. And as they're heavier animals as well, they break up the ground with their hooves and create pockets of bare ground in which wildflower and tree seeds can germinate. So they really kind of promote more of that biodiversity that we're looking for. And we either graze late summer after the wildflowers have set seed, or in low numbers, which will sort of mean that not all of those flowers get browsed off. So there's always something that can set seed. I've just got a bit more to say on conservation grazing. So if you can go back a slide. So yeah, the cattle create a mix of vegetation heights. So that's really beneficial to insects and ground nesting birds. And also really importantly and excitingly, as Tim mentioned about that really recent land purchase, by joining up that land, we're now able to graze even more extensively across large areas. So that's allowing more natural roaming and grazing patterns, sort of mimicking those dynamic processes created by wild herds in the past. So we can actually open up grazing across natural England and Yorkshire Wildlife Trust land for the first time with the same herd, which, yeah, is a really exciting prospect. Next slide, please. So the Yorkshire Dales National Park has only around 4% tree cover, which is pretty low, and only a quarter of that is comprised of native broadleaf species. So it's really a habitat that is lacking. The rest of that tree cover is largely made up of non-native timber plantations. So across the Wild Ingleborough programme area, we're aiming to create a mosaic of habitats, of which, yeah, woodland is one component, and will enable natural regeneration to take place through that change of grazing to extensive cattle grazing. And that will allow existing fragments of woodland to spread and link up over time, and also create more of that wood pasture. So higher up on the slopes of Ingleborough, though, we're aiming to re-establish tree cover where there isn't a nearby seed source. So trees can't actually recolonize that area naturally very easily. So in those areas, we've been working really hard planting trees in small pockets and upstreams, which will establish that habitat and also the seed sources going forward. So you can see that reflected in the map, those sort of little ribbons of green that are sort of stretching up towards the ridge there. So we've been planting native species such as alder, willows and downy birch in the wet areas, and then in the drier limestone areas, planting species including oak, hazel, rowan, bird cherry, hawthorn, blackthorn. Since Wild Ingleborough began, we've planted a whopping 104,000 trees with 3,000 volunteer hours, which is, yeah, staggering. Yeah, and volunteers have been absolutely amazing, because it's not an easy place to work in, and they've really got stuck in and really got behind us. So that's been public work parties, school groups, local conservation groups, and corporate groups, amongst others. We've experimented with plastic-free tree guards, though we've been mostly planting without guards. That's partly because they're really susceptible to the harsh weather in the uplands. They don't stand up very long, unfortunately. And also because we believe the trees will grow more bushy and resilient without. And what we end up doing is just planting at a higher density to compensate for any losses due to that sort of harsh environment, and also browsing from deer and voles. And we're already seeing results. So we were ridiculously excited to see the sawfly larvae in one of those photos last autumn. So they're feeding on some 2-year-old willows that we planted right at the beginning of the project. So yeah, it was just a real surprise to see after such a short period of time that those willows are actually supporting those larvae, which in turn are a really vital food source for a range of species such as black grouse, for example, which is an iconic upland bird, which is just about holding on in this area. And the larvae are the major food source for their chicks. So yeah, it's really exciting to see that we're sort of restoring this complex ecosystem, but starting from the ground up with the plants. Next slide, please. So we've set up a montane nursery to propagate and grow specialist mountain shrubs and wildflower species. So this is to help bolster numbers of small fragmented populations and be able to spread them then to different areas around Ingleborough, and over time restoring the diversity of upland vegetation, which should be here, and therefore supporting that ecosystem. So once planted out, those plants will then be future seed sources themselves. So we've been busy collecting seed and cuttings of montane species. We're careful to collect in small numbers so as not to adversely affect the viability of those vulnerable populations. So some of the montane shrub and wildflower species we're growing include eared, tea-leaved and creeping willow. So those are particularly adapted to the sort of harsh environments, as well as purple saxifrage that Tim had a picture of earlier, and spiked speedwell. So spiked speedwell is a great example of how vulnerable these species are. So it only exists on a single cliff ledge on Ingleborough because it's out of the way of grazing, and it's just managed to hang on there. And there's only about 50 plants on this one ledge. So that actually required a special license to collect and to handle the seed because it's so rare and highly protected, and it could only be accessed by abseiling down to it. So it's been quite a massive effort just to collect the seed from that one species, and we're really aiming to sort of save as many as different species as we can. So another isolated species that we've been collecting seed from is the rare holly fern. So it's a picture of that there. So we've been propagating these in quite a novel way. So collecting the spores into a spray bottle, mixing it with water, and then just spraying directly onto suitable areas of limestone pavement. So in that way, we can help establish it into new areas around Ingleborough. And as well as montane species, we're also helping to restore upland hay meadows. So globe flower seed heads that you can see there, they're one of the hay meadow species that we're growing. Also wood cratonspill and melancholy thistle. Next slide, please. So just moving on to another habitat that Tim mentioned earlier. So peatland restoration. Wild Ingleborough has over 300 hectares of peatland. It's a really rare habitat for a range of flora, insects and wading birds, but it also provides really vital ecosystem services. So it's a really valuable carbon store. So our peatlands in their various forms can actually store about 8 times more carbon than mature woodland. So as well as forming peat, these sphagnum mosses that you can see in that picture there can store 20 to 30 times their own dry weight in water. So they basically act like a giant sponge. So these peatlands are acting as like an essential flood mitigation tool. So in sort of these increasingly sort of severe storms that we're getting, they'll hold all of that water and slowly release it into the landscape. So they're really helping to sort of mitigate that flash flooding effect. So we had the Yorkshire Peat Partnership survey our peatlands back in 22, and that's really informed our tree planting and management plans going forward. And they've drawn us up a restoration plan for our peatlands, with groundworks beginning to expecting to begin in autumn this year. But we have already planted out 10,000 of those sphagnum moss plugs that I'm holding up in that picture, again with volunteers. So each of those tiny little plugs, they've got 5 really key peat forming mosses. So that's really kickstarting that restoration in really degraded areas where those mosses have been lost due to historic drainage. Next slide, please. So it's really important. We want to be able to demonstrate the benefits of landscape scale restoration for wildlife, as well as those ecosystem services. So we're really lucky to have the University of Leeds as one of our partners, and they're leading on that monitoring and research for us. So there's 2 research assistants that work on Wild Ingleborough project, and also 3 PhD students that are studying different aspects of landscape scale restoration. And we're also lucky that we've got decades of monitoring records from the National Nature Reserve. So in addition to that, we've established baseline data on the new bits of land we've purchased. So things like vegetation surveys, butterfly surveys, and bird transects, just to get that sort of baseline so we can monitor the change with our change in management going forward. And in terms of ecosystem services, we're also monitoring things like carbon storage above and below ground, water quality, soil health, and starting to monitor greenhouse gas emissions as well. So that's a very brief sort of touching on monitoring research. So that's it from me. So now I'm going to hand over to Ellie.
Thanks, Liz. The next slide, please, Tim. Thanks. So the community engagement programme that I've been working on for 2 years has got several different strands to it and sort of different aims. So from the outset, really, we've been endeavouring to garner local support and kind of find out who are the people and the organisations locally that want to work with us, and who we can sort of cooperate with and work alongside. Also providing opportunities for local school children and community groups and young people to learn from the project, opportunities for education and to get involved and have experiences, but also widening that out. So we've been looking at how we can work across the region to help disadvantaged and underrepresented groups to benefit from the work that we're doing and sort of have access to this beautiful landscape that we're all lucky enough to live in. Ingleborough is one of the most loved and one of the most visited mountains in the Yorkshire Dales. So people really do need to be at the heart of everything that we do in order to ensure the project really is embedded long term and ensure its long-term success. So I've got 4 more slides, so I'm just going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of these different strands of community engagement that I've been working on. Next slide, please, Tim. Thanks. So Liz has already talked quite a bit about volunteering. This is a real core part of our project. It's about getting these big works done, but it's also a really valuable opportunity to let people get hands-on, make a practical, lasting contribution to this landscape, and to learn new skills as well. So we have weekly volunteering sessions, which are really well established now, and there's quite a core group of volunteers from literally a mile or 2 away from the project area, who come really regularly and have really sort of developed some skills, like particularly over the summer dry stone walling. There was a small group who worked on that and are now like really skilled wallers, which is brilliant. So they run all year round, only ever called off when the most extreme of weathers. We have a range of seasonal tasks that volunteers can get involved in. We've also had larger groups from a whole spectrum of volunteers, from big corporate groups, including over the last 2 years, our big corporate funders Aviva have sent out regular groups of volunteers from their offices across the north of England. We've had university groups, we've had community groups, we've had groups of asylum seekers, we've had school children from the local area and further afield. So a really broad mix of people from across really the whole region have been able to come and get their hands on and see what we're doing upon Ingleborough. And some of that's involved, so you can see from this photo here, like some big days out. That's quite near the top of Ingleborough. That's a good hour of walking just to get to the project area. So it's a big commitment that these volunteers make, and it can be bitterly cold up there as well. So we're endlessly grateful for their contribution. Next slide, please, Tim. So the Experience Wild Ingleborough Access Fund so has run since 2022, and so far it's awarded 18 small grants to a really wide range of groups from across the whole region. We've had groups come as far away as Sheffield and Hull, and from as nearby as the local primary school a few miles away. So it's largely been, and it's been targeted towards sort of disadvantaged groups, a lot of them from the big urban population centres not too far from here, so kind of Bradford, Leeds, and then also into East Lancashire. Some of these towns and cities have pockets of some of the sort of most extreme deprivation in the country, really, particularly in the north of England, and a lot of these people will not have had the opportunity to visit this area before. So it's been brilliant to be able to give them that opportunity. We've had groups supporting disabled people, we've had groups supporting young carers. It's been a real mix, and the Access Fund has been really accessible in that groups can tailor it to meet their needs and abilities and their confidence levels. So I've offered support to some of them that haven't felt able to sort of come and visit by themselves, because it is, if you're not used to being in the outdoor environment, it can be quite daunting. We're in quite a remote place. It feels pretty wild, and it doesn't have a lot of the facilities that people might be used to. So as well as giving money, we've sort of helped people design a visit that's going to help them stretch their comfort zone a little bit, but also that's going to be really enjoyable for them, and that they're going to go back having learned something and with a desire to come again and feel as though this landscape is for them. I think that's really important. We want everyone who visits here to feel as though this is a place that belongs to them and that they can come and enjoy and learn from. Next slide, please, Tim. Another way that I've been engaging young people with Ingleborough has been through the John Muir Awards. So this is a programme that's run by the John Muir Trust across the whole of the UK. And it's a really good framework, I've discovered, for schools in particular, because it has some, it focuses on 4 different key aspects of learning about a wild place. Around 30 people got involved in a series of workshops that were held all around in the sort of villages and towns surrounding Ingleborough, and came up with a report which had a whole series of suggestions and ideas, which we've sort of revisited over and over again, and you know, some like really great insights into what the local community wants and needs from a project like ours. And then Ground Nest Fest is something that I'm sort of busy with at the moment. Last year, it was a collaboration between myself and the Yorkshire Peat Partnership and a local museum in Settle. We decided to run a day of free arts and crafts events for local people to learn about our ground nesting birds. It was particularly focused around the middle of April. The 21st of April is World Curlew Day. So that's a sort of national day where lots of different charities and people working in curlew protection celebrate curlews and spread awareness about their situation. So we decided to do something like that around Settle, this being one of the sort of strongholds of one of the curlew's most important breeding grounds in the north of England, and one of the birds that we're sort of hoping to restore habitat for on Ingleborough. So that was one day that we did last year, and it was really successful. So we decided to really go for it this year and put on a whole week of events. And we've been able to partner up with all sorts of different groups and organisations. So we've got some local farmers that are talking about the work that they're doing on their own land and how they've integrated wading bird protection and conservation with productive farming, which is really important, that we're able to cross that bridge really and demonstrate that not just to sort of the general public, but demonstrate to farmers that it is possible to do these things together, that you can be doing conservation work while still running a productive farming business. So I'm really excited to have 2 local farmers giving talks and guided walks around their farms this year. We've also got a speaker from Curlew Action, the big national charity who've done some like really important advocacy work internationally about curlew protection, and a whole load of other events with artists and free events around the area for a week. So really trying to bring together lots of different stakeholders, and sometimes people with quite different coming from quite different places and with different priorities, but sharing all those core values. So yeah, that's just some of the different examples of what we've been doing in terms of community engagement. So I'm going to hand back to Tim now.
Thank you, Liz and Nelly. Hope you've seen that we've been very busy. I just wanted to also shout out to the other members of the team that aren't here today, but Dwayne and Joe, who have just worked magnificently, and previous staff before that who've kind of, these volunteers don't kind of coordinate themselves. They, you know, we do a lot of work to help them get here and get the work done on the ground, and it's all down to that relatively small team working really, really hard. So a great job. And I just wanted to just share a few numbers really. So Liz has already talked about the amazing number of trees we planted, the over 100,000, but we also had about 9,000 volunteer hours. We've engaged about 16,000 people in many ways, both physically and online through social media and things like that. And between ourselves and the National Nature Reserve, we've now got we think 1,300 hectares of land, beginning that journey to being a wilder area. I wouldn't say they're restored by any stretch of the imagination, but they're well on their way now. They've got the trees in the ground and the grazing regime sorted, that hopefully beyond our lifetimes, I suppose, they'll become really wild environments, which is fantastic. And the newer things of putting in sphagnum to recover those bogs as well. So 10,000 plugs planted, which is that was a big day as well, that I went out and helped with that. It was a lot of activity by a lot of volunteers, so a really good effort. However, that's 3 years worth of work. We don't want to stop there. We want to carry on the momentum. We want to do more, both within the core area of Ingleborough that we started, but we also want to share what we're doing and expand it and do it elsewhere. So my job is to try and work out ways of doing that and take our work forward into whole new areas. And particularly, Ellie touched on that need to work with farmers. You know, we've been lucky here that we own the land, so we can pretty much do what we want to do. But if we're going to make wilder landscapes wilder, then we've got to work with the landowning community around us. So I'm just going to go through a few slides of where we're planning to go next as a project and a program. So I've tried to kind of summarize this, and you've already had a talk which pretty much covers all of these areas into one diagram about all the kind of components of what we think we need to do in order to take the lessons we've learned from Wild Ingleborough more widely. So we've got to do more of the upland species recovery. Growing those plants in the nursery takes quite a long time. It'll take us a while to get those plants in enough volume that we can plant them out across a big area and encourage those populations to spread. We need to carry on getting the local communities and the farmers and the kids and everybody to see wilder landscapes as an important part of their community. So changing hearts and minds, or working with hearts and minds on that. We're going to need to present an economically sustainable model to farmers if this is going to work for them. So we need to look at sustainability. We've already started working partnership through Wild Ingleborough, but we want to do more of that. We've got the Ingleborough estate to the south of us that we want to work more closely with, and we've got groups of farmers that, as you'll see in a moment, we're starting to work with clusters of farmers for landscape recovery. We want to make sure that we do that other bit of the Lawton Principles, is connecting up. So we need to connect up what we're doing at Ingleborough with other interested projects and other partnerships across the Dales who are doing similar to us or starting on that journey. So we've got the Woodland Trust over at Snays Home in the upper parts of Wensleydale, but we've also got some other landscape recovery projects starting in Wensleydale and also across Wharfdale and the heart of the Dales. So there's lots of potential for us to join up our wildlife here and connect across those landscapes. And of course, we want to move more and more towards that natural processes taking the lead, so that wilder land management. In fact, what we want to do is get rid of the management bit and allow nature to do its own thing. It'll take a little while we build those connections and recover what we've got, but we do need to make those connections. So I'm going to just kind of whiz through each of those in a little bit of detail as to what we're doing next, subject to us raising the funds. So one of the biggest ones is we were successful last year in bidding to the government for their sort of top tier of their new agri-environment scheme, which is called the Landscape Recovery Scheme. So we bid for a program called the Three Dales, which covers the upper parts of Kingsdale, Chapel-a-Dale and Ribblesdale. So it includes the Wild Ingleborough area, but as you'll see on the map, it goes a lot further to the north and to the west and covers things like Camfell and Blee Moor, and some of the private sort of farmed areas pretty much below the Ribble Viaduct. So if you go up to Ribble Head and look at the viaduct, you'll see a kind of slightly more intensively farmed area. So a lot of those farmers are working with us on this larger landscape recovery. We're in a development phase, so we've got 2 years to develop a big plan, which if we're then successful with that and we can bring in a blended finance approach, that's now a combination of public money and private sector funding to work with those farmers to recover that landscape over 20 years. And obviously we're learning a lot from Wild Ingleborough to help inform that group of farmers. That project has target species that we really want to do our work for, so we picked 3 of the most iconic for the area, but also who are unfortunately struggling, and numbers are low, so we're hoping that we can reverse that trend. So curlew, which Liz and Ellie have talked about, and then the black grouse, which is really important. We had a black grouse flying over South House Moor, which has been that's a first record for a very long time. So fingers crossed, the birds are in the area and will come back. And then the ring ouzel, which we have a few records of, but again is restricted to some fragments within the area. We also want to build, so we've already started building a partnership with the Ingleborough estate in the Three Dales project. I put the same map up because you'll see that there's a big kind of gap just below all of those dark lines, which is Ingleborough Common and further south, and that's mostly owned by Ingleborough Estate. So there's a huge area of the south of Ingleborough that we'd like to kind of again work with the estate to try and expand what we're doing in the north further into the south. They're very, very keen, very supportive. They've got a lot of tenant farmers to work with and a lot of neighbours to work with, and we will need to start the discussions with those tenants and farmers as well as the estate itself, and they're very keen for us to do that. So we're hoping that we'll be able to expand our partnership still further. So species recovery will carry on. We've really just established the Montane nursery. As I say, it'll take a while for what are slow growing and sometimes hard to germinate plants to get bulked up to a level where we can start planting them out, and then we'll be into a big reintroduction program of making sure that there's the right places and the right habitats for them to be put into. We're also looking at trying to establish more Atlantic rainforest through land purchase and tree planting. But an Atlantic rainforest is characterized not by its trees necessarily, but by its ferns and its mosses and its lichens, these kind of bryophytes that grow on the branches of the trees. It's so wet that quite often the trees look like just scaffolding for mosses and ferns. So we also want to look at how we might, as we've already started on Ingleborough, be able to kind of propagate ferns and mosses and these lower plant groups as well. I've already talked about the Three Dales project trying to take forward black grouse, curlew and ring ouzel, but we need to do that everywhere with the farmers in the area because it is such an iconic area for those 3 species. We've got good populations of butterflies and moths on our limestone. They respond extremely well to the amazing wildflowers we've got, but again, those habitats are fragmented, so we hope we'll see increased populations of butterflies and moths, but we'd also like to look at other invertebrates. We know there's a kind of invertebrate crisis, biomass crisis in England at the moment, and we're hoping that by changing the habitat, getting more of those sawfly larvae you saw on the willows, will reverse that trend. Everybody talks about a splatter test on your car, and that we don't get invertebrates splattered all over our car. So hopefully one day when we're driving around this area, and it doesn't sound very pleasant, we'll get splatters of invertebrates back on our cars, and that'd be a good sign that we're succeeding. And then we have red squirrels. We do have very rare 1 or 2 sightings of red squirrels coming into the area now, presumably from some of the surrounding areas in Cumbria and Greenfield to the east of us. So we want to encourage that, so we're going to start monitoring them, and then hopefully as the trees grow we'll see red squirrels starting to spread, and we'll look at ways of encouraging them into the area. So we're covering hopefully all of the species groups that we want to see in the area at the moment. More of the same, really, again, in terms of trying to get this landscape accessible to all, and for everybody to enjoy it and everybody to take a part of it and understand it, and hopefully, people to come and put pressure on us to do more, and all the things that go with a more informed public that utilise an area. So Ellie's work will carry on with the school's work, the John Muir Award. There is a GCSE in natural history now that we'd like to explore whether we can do things with that. The Access Fund, we'd like to continue. That's been very successful, and carry on with all those other events and activities, and also do more with those farmers and land managers to encourage them to do more on their own land for wildlife. Through 3 Dales projects and through my work, we are trying to make sure that there's some sustainable economic benefits from this kind of work. So we lobbying government to make sure that the new English land management scheme still provides public funding for wildlife benefits, for wildlife friendly farming. But we're also working with private companies and consultants to develop markets for some of the benefits of wild landscapes, such as carbon sequestration and flood risk reduction. We'd also like to see if we can, there's a lot of tourism in the Dales, but not a lot of it is aimed specifically at wildlife, and we'd like to see whether we can develop some wildlife-based tourism packages to bring people more into the Dales, and perhaps show, spend a bit more money and stay a bit longer, and maybe have a more slow experience than trying to race around the 3 peaks, which is what most of the people going through the area do at the moment. And then there may be some products that could be branded with a wildlife brand, and bring some income into local communities. We also believe that a wilder landscape will bring jobs. It's already brought jobs. It's obviously brought the Wild Ingleborough team. My old team, the Yorkshire Peat Partnership, has expanded 4 or 5-fold over the years. So we know that the environment can employ people, and we'd like to spread that message more widely. So we'd like to see if we can provide training and perhaps apprenticeships in landscape recovery industries, if that's what we call them in the future. And then the wilder land management, so really trying to join things up to see nature doing the work that we're doing. Obviously, we've lost a lot of the core components of a natural environment, so we will mimic some things like using cattle in conservation grazing, for example, but we'd like to see a lot more of us being able to step back and allow nature to do its thing. And the picture on the bottom there is actually from Rewilding Britain, and they have a series of pictures showing how nature's recovery might happen in the uplands. And this is kind of probably a stage before full rewilding that I've put there, which if we can get even to that stage, we'll be making a major contribution to the wildlife of the area. The evidence base that we need continues. We don't really know enough about how to rewild the landscape or get a wilder landscape, so we want to make sure that we're monitoring everything we do and assessing everything we do, so that we can see what's working and what's not. And hopefully it will show that we are gaining such a wide range of species as well. And we'd like to engage more people in doing that work. So the Peat programme have developed a citizen science Eyes on the Bog monitoring programme, which we've already started installing onto the peatlands on Wild Ingleborough, but we'd like to do more things like river fly monitoring in the rivers to see how water quality is changing as well, all of which can be done by well-trained volunteers. But when you look at people like Rewilding Britain, they argued that a truly wild landscape has got to be big and bigger. So I put this slide in just to demonstrate that although we feel we're working across a massive landscape, and we are, if you look at the guidance from the rewilding organisations and the wilder landscapes organisations, you know, you're talking about needing a 50 to 10,000 hectare landscape in order to really be able to make those natural processes function well. So I did a quick map of what that looked like, and you can see we've got Ingleborough and the Three Dales project in red, and it's a big chunk, but actually 50 to 100,000 hectares is pretty much all of that area that you can see on the map there. So we think we've just started, and we'd like to do a lot more. So on that basis, unfortunately, we have to talk about how we do that, and that comes down to money. We will need, if we're going to meet those ambitions, we'll need to keep funding what we're doing. We are in a bit of a new phase. So our current major funder, which is Aviva, is moving on. They're moving their objectives elsewhere at the end of June. So we're launching the Wild Ingleborough campaign and appeal to start to look at the next stage. And I've just put a broad overview of what we think our budget is at the moment and where we're going next over the next 2 years. And you can see in red that we've got some shortfalls. So we're actively fundraising at the moment. You can see also that we've secured quite a significant chunk already, but we do need more. And that will enable us to do, at least for 24-25, yet more work, so more trees going in the ground. We've got a lot of dry stone walls that we need to keep up. It's like painting the Forth Bridge, and the team spent a lot of time building those walls, and that takes time to do that. We'd like to develop some new visitor access infrastructure, and also linking that to a series of walks that Natural England produced for the NNR a good few years ago, and they could do with a revamp and a relaunch. We hope to be able to fund the peatland restoration starting in the autumn. Lots more groups supported by the Access Fund and more schools, and crucially continue to fund that research and monitoring work that University of Leeds are doing with us, but also expand that into citizen science. And then we want to continue to develop the projects around curlew, red squirrel and black grouse. So even next year, we've got huge ambition, but we haven't quite got the funds to support that yet. So that's where we are now. And I think that's my, oh, sorry, yes. So our last slide. So yeah, we're launching the Wild Ingleborough appeal. As I say, our current 3-year project has come to an end, or will be coming to an end in June. We've achieved a huge amount, as I hope you'll have seen from this presentation, but we want to continue that momentum. And I took this photo looking away from Ingleborough Mountain in the opposite direction, with one of my favourite places, Scar Close, on the left of the fence, and part of the Ingleborough that's not owned, part of the NNR, and not owned by, which is privately owned and heavily grazed by sheep. And I think you'll pretty clearly see the difference. So we want to make all of our Wild Ingleborough landscape look like the bit on the left, and that's going to take a lot of work to convert the bit on the right into that landscape. So got a long way to go, and we want to continue that momentum. So I think that's it from me. I guess, Grace, we're going to take a break. Is that right? Yes, we are.